Welcome to the debate. Today we're dismantling what might just be the most pervasive myth in the modern economy, the idea that you need money to make money. We are dissecting the $100 Startup by Chris Guillebeau, which is really less of a business book and more of a manifesto for the micro business revolution.
A revolution that sounds incredibly appealing. And, that's precisely why we have to scrutinize it so closely. The central question for us today is whether this model of low-cost, passion-based business is a genuinely replicable blueprint for freedom, or is it a dangerous form of survivorship bias? Is this book liberating, or is it just encouraging people to leap off a cliff with nothing but a hobby and a Twitter account?
Wow, that's a bleak way to frame it. I'd argue the real cliff is staying in a traditional job. Guillebeau makes this very clear. The old social contract, work hard, keep your head down, the corporation will take care of you, that's dead. So we're arguing that the barriers to entry have just collapsed. You don't need venture capital, you don't need an MBA, you need a product, a customer, and a way to get paid. That's it.
And I'm here to argue that while the barriers to entry are gone, the barriers to sustainability are probably higher than ever. My position is that passion is a terrible, terrible regulator for business decisions. The glorification of hustle and the lack of real planning, it leads to a very specific type of failure, one that feels like freedom right up until the moment you can't pay your rent.
Okay, let's start with the context here, because I think you're underestimating the sheer necessity of this shift. We're not just talking about people who want to leave their jobs, we're talking about people who are forced to. Look at Michael Hanna. He's one of the main case studies. Here's a guy, 25 years as a sales professional. He gets called into an office, handed a box, and told his services are no longer required. That is the new reality. The quote-unquote safe road, employment, was the risky one all along.
Michael Hanna is a great story. I agree with you there. But let's look at what he actually did. He didn't just, follow passion blindly. He started selling mattresses out of an old car dealership. That's a hustle, sure, but it's also a high-risk move that just happened to pay off. He was pushed into it by circumstances, not because the model is inherently superior.
It paid off because he stripped away all the complexity. And that is the core philosophy of the book, demystification. A business isn't a suit and tie, it isn't a board meeting. It is simply a product, a customer, and a payment. Hanada didn't sit down and write a 60-page business plan. He didn't wait around for a bank loan. He bought a truckload of mattresses and he started selling. And the data, it backs this up. Guillebeau's study of entrepreneurs. The average startup cost was $610.60. That's the number that matters. It proves that capital isn't the gatekeeper anymore. Initiative is.
That is a very catchy number. It looks fantastic on a book jacket, but I think it's misleading. It accounts for financial capital, yes, but it completely ignores human capital and social capital. Most of the success stories in this book involve people leveraging high-level skills they got on a corporate dime or using vast networks they spent years building. My problem is with the action bias the book promotes. It champions the hustler, the person who just moves fast, but it kind of glosses over the martyr. The martyr is the person who's all action but has zero market fit. They're the one working 80 hours a week making less than minimum wage because they were just told to start.
But the text specifically addresses that. It makes a very clear distinction between the charlatan who is all talk, the martyr, all action and no strategy, and the hustler. The goal is to be the hustler. And the way you do that is through what Guillebeau calls convergence. This is the key technical insight of the whole book. It isn't just do what you love. Convergence is the intersection of your passion or your skill, and, this is the crucial part, what other people will actually pay for. If you miss that second circle, you don't have a business, you just have a hobby.
Right. Convergence is the theory. But in practice, the book leans so heavily on this ready, fire, aim approach. It pretty much tells you to launch before you're ready. It puts speed way ahead of structure.
Because you are never ready. That's the whole point. Elaborate business plans are just procrastination. We spend months tweaking a font on a website for a product no one even wants. Look at Jen Adrian and Omar Nori, designers, facing burnout. They wanted a specific map for their travels, a scratch-off map, couldn't find one, so they made one. Did they spend 6 months analyzing the global cartography market, Run focus groups? No. They spent $500, money they barely had, and printed a small run. Put up a simple website. They sold out in 10 minutes. They scaled after the demand was proven, not before. If they had waited to aim perfectly, they never would have fired at all.
And that's a fantastic outcome for them. But you are cherry-picking the success stories. Ready, fire, aim looks like genius when you hit the target. It looks like pure recklessness when you shoot yourself in the foot. Let's take a counterexample from the very same book, David Wachtendonk and his party planning business. They use this exact philosophy. They ran a Groupon to kickstart everything, and they estimated, back of the napkin math, they'd sell maybe 1,000 vouchers. They sold 3,300.
Which, sounds like a dream problem to have. Most startups would kill for that kind of volume.
It was a nightmare, a complete nightmare. They had zero infrastructure. The venue they were using was a rebranding to a sports bar at the exact same time. The service fell apart, so that huge influx of customers, it didn't build their business, it destroyed their reputation because they couldn't deliver quality at that scale. That is the dark side of action bias. Scaling requires planning. You can't just hustle your way through 3,300 angry customers. That one-page business plan is cute, but it doesn't account for supply chain shock.
I disagree that it destroyed them. That story is in the book to teach resilience. They survived it. They learned. But more importantly, if they had tried to build the perfect infrastructure for 3,000 people before launching, they would have spent thousands of dollars and probably sold 0 tickets. You can't steer a parked car. The book advocates for marketing before manufacturing. Remember the author's friend who sold the high-end car guide? He placed ads for a $900 guide before he'd written a single page. He just waited to see if people would order it. When they did, then he wrote it. He completely eliminated the risk of creating a product no one wanted. That isn't reckless. It's the most efficient market testing there is.
Efficient, sure, but it borders on the unethical. You're selling something that doesn't exist, that relies on a level of trust you can very easily break. But let's pivot to the engine of this whole model, passion. You talked about convergence, but let's be honest, the emotional hook of this book is follow your passion. I want to challenge whether passion is a reliable business asset or just a feeling that blinds you to reality.
I'd frame it differently. It's not do what you love. It's skilled transformation. It's taking a passion and pivoting it into a utility. Take Gary Leff. His passion was travel hacking, using frequent flyer miles. Most people would call that a nerdy hobby, but he realized he had a very specific skill, navigating the labyrinth of airline award charts. He turned that into a business, charging $250 per booking. He solves a pain point for busy executives who have the miles but not the time. That's the formula. Passion plus usefulness equals success. The passion provides the stamina to do the deep work. Without it, he wouldn't have the expertise.
That's a fair point on stamina. You do need to care. But let's look at Mignon Fogarty. She's the perfect counterexample. She started a podcast called Absolute Science. Incredibly passionate about science, she put more effort into promoting it than anything she'd ever done. And crickets. It failed. The market just did not care about her passion. She had to pivot to Grammar Girl to find an audience. The market wanted grammar tips, not science. This proves the market dictates the terms, not your enthusiasm. You can have all the stamina in the world, but like Guillebeau says with his pizza analogy, I can be passionate about eating mushroom pizza, but no one is going to pay me to do it. Usefulness is the dominant variable, and it's much harder to identify than passion.
I agree. Usefulness is key, but Mignon's story actually supports my point about being agile. She didn't stick with the failure. She used the skills she developed, podcasting, audio editing, and applied them to a new topic. That is skill transformation. And look at Kyle Hipp, the wedding photographer. She succeeded because she realized what the market actually wanted versus what they said they wanted. Clients said they didn't want traditional shots, but they didn't know what they did want. She gave them her passion, candid, photojournalistic shots, and that became her unique selling point. She dug deeper. That requires an artist's intuition, which comes from passion.
It requires intuition, yes, but it also requires a reality check. The book has a reality check checklist for a good reason. It asks, are enough other people willing to pay for your expertise? My concern is that the book celebrates the successes like Kyle Hepp, but ignores the thousands of photographers giving away work for free because they love it, but haven't figured out the value perception.
Well, let's talk about value perception because that is the third pillar here. This is where the book gets really useful. It advocates for value-based pricing, not cost-plus. There's this incredible story about a locksmith. The author locks his keys in his car. A locksmith shows up, pops the lock in 10 seconds, and charges $50. And the author felt cheated because it was so fast. He thought, I just paid $50 for 10 seconds of work?
Right, it defies the logic of hourly labor we're all trained to accept.
Exactly. But he wasn't paying for the 10 seconds. He was paying for the years of mastery that allowed the locksmith to do it in 10 seconds. Micro-entrepreneurs succeed by selling benefits, not features. We aren't selling horse rides, we are selling cowboy escapism. Scott McMurran's Tour Saver book costs $100. That's incredibly expensive for a paperback, but it is cheap for the value it unlocks. You buy it, you save $400 on a helicopter tour. The ROI is immediate. That's the shift. You price the result, not the effort.
Okay, I accept the theory of value-based pricing. It's sound. But delivering that value requires what the book calls the hustle. And this is where the whole freedom promise gets very shaky for me. The text suggests a rule: 50% creating, 50% connecting. That means half your time is spent selling, marketing, grinding. You bring up the locksmith, but consider the $10,000 versus 10 hours experiment. Gilbo compared spending 10 grand on Google ads versus 10 hours of hustling, guest posting, emailing, connecting one-on-one.
And the hustle won. Zero cost, higher return. 84 customers from the hustle, 78 from the ads. It proves you don't need capital. It proves personal connection beats algorithmic advertising every single time.
It proves you don't need financial capital. It proves you need sweat capital, and tons of it. The book praises the author for answering emails at 2 a.m. from Hong Kong. It frames this as dedication. To me, that just sounds like a self-made prison. If your business depends on you personally hustling, writing guest posts, and answering emails in the middle of the night, have you really achieved freedom? Or have you just created a job where the boss is a tyrant, and that boss is you? There's a very fine line between strategic giving, like the architect giving 5-cent advice at a farmer's market, and manipulation. Hustling is relentless. It's not for everyone.
My position remains that freedom is the ultimate goal, and the barriers to that freedom are mostly psychological, not financial. The $100 startup proves that with $600 or less, you can opt out of the traditional workforce. We've seen the evidence. The mattress delivery men, the map makers, the piano teachers in Costa Rica. The combination of convergence, action bias, and value-based pricing allows ordinary people to build extraordinary lives. Waiting for permission, waiting for funding, waiting for the perfect plan. That's the old way, and the old way is dying. The only real risk is doing nothing.
I respect the passion of that position. I do. However, I still maintain that while the barrier to entry is low, the barrier to sustainability is market savvy. The $100 startup model is accessible, yes, but it is not a lottery ticket. It requires a very specific type of person who is willing to live with uncertainty, hustle constantly, and pivot ruthlessly when the market rejects their passion. We saw with the Groupon example that enthusiasm is simply not enough. You can't just follow your passion. You have to submit it to the harsh discipline of usefulness. This model rejects the safety of employment, but it replaces it with the volatility of the market. And that's not for everyone.
It demands a choice. The material demands you choose between the safety of employment and the potential and, yes, the risk of freedom.
Precisely. And that's a choice every individual has to weigh very, very carefully.
Thank you for listening to the debate. We hope this exchange has illuminated the path for you, whichever road you choose to take.